Welcome, everybody, to Siyum Sotah. It's always great to see similar faces, the same people coming back, new people joining. We're very, very excited about our program tonight. We have Dr. Tammy Jacobowitz with us, and we have Judi Felber, who's actually sitting with me, finishing Shas, which is a very, very exciting moment. Siyum Sotah is sponsored by Alana Friedman for the continued refuah shlema of Chana Sarah bat Etel Sima. May your trajectory of recovery continue speedily. Sponsored for the continued refuah of Yitzchak ben Esther. You have helped so many to facilitate the recovery. May Hashem repay you in kind and restore you to good health quickly. Thank you also to Ahava Liebtag for sponsoring Masechet Sotah. And we're going to get started with our daf. As you know, we've had a bunch of long dapim, and today is no exception. So we're going to get started right away and get through our daf Mem Tet. Amar Rabbi Ila bar Yevrechia. We're going to have a bunch of statements that Rabbi Ila bar Yevrechia says. Ilmalei tfilato shel David hayu kol Yisrael mochrei revav. Were it not for the prayers of David HaMelech, all the Jews would be in lowly occupations. Okay, there's different opinions what exactly revav is. Is it wax? Is it fatty? Stuff that gets sticky and disgusting. Humiliating jobs. Shenema, Shita Hashem Mora Lahem. Now, where's the prayer of David where he says this? In Sefer Tehillim, he says, God should help to have us Mora Lahem, that we are in charge. And that way, we're not the ones who other people are in charge of us, and we're having lowly occupations, but that we are actually having, we're in respectable places in society. Va'amar Rabbi Ila bar Yevrechia, ilmalei tfilato shel Chabakuk hayu shnei talmidei chachamim mitkasim b'talit echad v'oskim b'Torah. Were it not for the prayer of Habakkuk, we would have had two Talmidei Chachamim sharing one talit in order to learn Torah. No money, poverty, terrible situation where you can't even have your own cloak. Shenema, how do we know that Habakkuk helped in this kind of situation? Hashem shamati shimacha yareti Hashem pa'alcha bekerev shanim chayehu. So they say, Hashem, you heard my prayer, and Hashem pa'alcha bekerev shanim chayehu. What does it mean, bekerev shanim chayehu? Al tikra bekerev shanim ela bekiruv shnayim. Two people coming close together in order to fit under one talit. So God's prayers are going to help us to overcome that. This is the prayer of Habakkuk to God is going to help. God is going to help overcome that. So what we have in these two descriptions so far, which connects with what we were talking about in the previous Gemara, is about once the temple was destroyed, things started looking very bleak. And we have these situations now. This isn't the time of the destruction, but we're talking about situations that are complicated situations that we need God to help us get out of. Va'amar Rabbi Ila bar Yevrechia, third statement of his for today. Shnei talmidei chachamim hamalchim baderech. This is a very famous statement. Two talmidei chachamim who are on the path. Ve'en beinehem divrei Torah, and they're not learning Torah. Ru'uyin lisaref ba'esh. They should be burned by fire. Shenema vayi hem ha'holchim haloch v'daber. We're talking about Elisha and Eliyahu. We're going back to Elisha. Had a bunch of stories about him a few days ago. They're walking and talking. V'hinei rechav esh, and there's a chariot of fire, but it doesn't destroy them. Here you see it's because they were talking. Tamadi kadibur haleka dibur ru'uyin lisaref. Otherwise, they would have gotten burned by it because they weren't talking Torah. Va'amar Rabbi Ila bar Yevrechia, another statement of his. Shnei talmidei chachamim, again about talmidei chachamim. This is going to be of a different sort. Hadarim be'ir echad, that live in the same city. Ve'ein nochin ze leze b'halacha. If they fight about halacha, they don't have respect for each other. Echad met ve'echad goleh. One is going to die, and the other is going to go to the refuge city. Meaning he's going to accidentally kill the other one. Shenemar, lanu shama rotzech asher yitzach et re'ehu bivli da'at. As it says, they're going to a murderer, right? The murderer will run to this place. Asher yitzach et re'ehu bivli da'at, who's going to kill somebody else bivli da'at. What does it mean bivli da'at? Ein da'at ela Torah. It's on account of Torah. Da'at is a reference to the Torah. And therefore, how do we know this? It seems like they don't have knowledge, which means they don't have Torah. So here they're connecting the idea of Torah with the fact that someone might murder someone else. Maybe it's this idea of fighting so hard that it's as if you're killing somebody else, and it could cause someone else's death. So this is all about, sometimes the rabbis also read into, they talked about the issues that they were grappling with, which is there was a lot of fighting going on. And we see this in some of the Talmudic stories that highlight, right? Sometimes they kind of put it on earlier generations, the problem of their own generation, which is people not getting along with each other, like Rabbi Akiva's students dying because they didn't get along with each other. So here you see that they're grappling with this issue of, we all know that this unfortunately goes on nowadays, of people assuming my truth is the only truth and fighting about Torah. Amar Rav Yehuda Berei de Rabbi Chia, Kol tamid chacham haosek b'Torah mitoch hadchak, tfilato nishmat. Okay, we have a lot of things, by the way, this is similar to the end of a lot of other Masechtot, where they're highlighting the importance of Talmud Torah, of learning Torah. So a Tamid Chacham, a Torah scholar who learns Torah with struggling, meaning, right, is having a hard time making ends meet and yet still makes the time to learn Torah, Tfilato Nishmat, this is a person whose prayers will be heard. Shene'emal, ki am b'Tzion yeshev b'Yerushalayim, the people living in Jerusalem, b'chol lo tivkeh, they won't cry. God will bring you grace to the sounds of your cries. Kishamato anach, when he hears you, he will answer you. So here we have the description of someone who's going to have their prayers answered. And it says right after that, V'natan Hashem lachem lechem tzar v'mayim lachat. You're going to have, right, bread. It's talking about somebody who barely can make ends meet, barely gets to eat bread and a little bit of bread and a little bit of water. So here we're describing someone who's struggling and yet learns Torah and his prayers will be heard. Rabbi Yavau Omer, he continues and says, someone like this must be inoto miziva shchina. He will actually be satiated from the divine presence. Somebody who really struggles and yet makes time to learn Torah is going to have the presence of God with him. Shenemar, it says there in the same pasuk that your eyes are going to see your teacher. Rabbi Acha Bar Chanina Amar, Af ein apargod nin'al b'fanav. There won't be like a distance between him and God. The pargod is this separator, this barrier. Shene'amar, lo yikanef od morecha. It says in that same pasuk, lo yikanef, your teacher will not be yikanef. What is kanaf? Kanaf is the corner of the garment, that which could theoretically create a block between you and God, and that kanaf won't be there. There won't even be a separation. This is, we talked the other day about people that God will never see, right? That they will never see the face of God. And this is the opposite. Rashbag Omer Mishum Rabbi Yoshua, Miyom Shecharav Beit HaMikdash. Okay, now we're back to the Mishnah, right? And Rashbag had said, let's go back to the Mishnah for a second. Miyom Shecharav Beit HaMikdash. And right, he said, there's not a day without a curse. So now we're going to learn Amarava b'chol yom vayom merubeh klalato mishal chavecho. We're now going to start describing a very bleak situation, that every day is worse. We're more cursed than we were the day before. Shene'emal baboker tomar mi yitein erev u'ba'erev tomar mi yitein boker. This is a pasuk that says it in the morning. You're going to say who will bring the evening, and in the evening you're going to say who will bring the morning. Now the simple way of reading this pasuk is really seems to be saying that today in the morning, I'm going to say what's going to be in the evening, meaning I want this day to be over, right? This ever happened to you? Kind of say, I just want this day to be over. Tomorrow will be a better day. And that really sounds like the simple reading of the pasuk. But in a minute, the Gemara is going to tell us that's not the way to read this pasuk. Okay, and that pasuk is a more optimistic approach to life, which is saying, right, today's a bad day, but I'm hoping tomorrow will be a lot better. But hey, boker, the Gemara says, what boker are we referring to? If it means, and we're talking about the end of the pasuk, when it says at evening, you're going to say, oh, I wish it would be the morning. If it's talking about tomorrow, mi yada mai have. How on earth are you going to know that tomorrow is going to be any better, right? I shouldn't tell you this if that's the way you go to sleep at night and saying, I hope tomorrow will be a better day. But you have no idea if tomorrow is going to be a better day. Ela dechalif. It must be referring to yesterday. And it's showing that yesterday was always a better day because this is what we've been discussing, that this is what Rashbag said in the Mishnah, that it just got worse and worse as the days went on. Ela alma, amai kamakayim. Well, then if that's the case, how is the world surviving? If things keep getting worse from day to day, what's keeping the world going? A Kedusha de Sidra, very interesting answer. Kedusha de Sidra is the Kaddish that we say in Uvalet Zion. It's a tefillah that we say after Ashrei and the end of our davening in the mornings, and we say it at Mincha and Shabbat and some other times. This is called Kedusha de Sidra. This is what is keeping people alive. Ve'ayehei shmei rabba de agadita. And the Yehei Shmei Rabbah that we're all familiar with from Kaddish the people say after learning Agadata. Okay, why Agadata? Why not after learning halacha? Also after learning halacha, they would say, this is a custom you might see people doing nowadays, which is sometimes when someone gives a shiur, they say a kaddish after. That's the kaddish they're referring to here. Why specifically Agadata? Remember, we had recently the story of all the people went to hear the Agadata shir. They didn't want to go to the halacha shir. It was too difficult for them or too heavy. So the Agadata shir attracted the most people. And when you say Yehei Shmei Rabbah, God's name should be blessed with lots of people there, that's a very special thing that keeps the world going. So that and this Kedusha de Sidra. So Uval Tzion seems to have a very central place, right? Generally, we don't think of it too seriously because at the end of davening, almost like an afterthought, but here you see it's a very, very important prayer. And some people say specifically because there, how is it different from Kedusha? Because we translate the Kadosh, 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 we translate some of those psukim into Aramaic. Why is that so important? First of all, relevant to our Masechet, we had all this discussion of Aramaic, and also because the Aramaic is what the people understood. It again connects with this idea of the Agadata. It's a prayer that everybody connected with because they understood it, right? As opposed to nowadays where most people, we don't understand the Aramaic. Hopefully now you've been learning the daf for a while. The Aramaic is more familiar to you, but the Aramaic in those days was the most familiar to people. And perhaps because of that, that prayer took such a central part here. Shene'emar. Now, how do we know that this is so important? Because it says, Eretz efatah kemo okel tzamavet velo starim. The world is dark because it's like the darkness of death because it doesn't have order. And hayesh starim tofia me'ofel. If it has order, then the Torah will come out of the darkness. And this is basically saying that the darkness, right? What combats that? The Kedusha de Sidra, because the Kedusha de Sidra is organized. It's organized sanctity. Okay, why exactly it's organized is a good question. I'm going to leave that question aside right now. V'lo yarad tal libracha v'nital tam perot. Now we're going to get to some stories here, very interesting stories. The dew only came down in a bad way. It wasn't good anymore for the produce, and people couldn't taste or smell. We're going to talk about also smell the fruits. Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer. So the Gemara quotes a Braita. That was a quote from the Mishnah we saw yesterday. Tahara bitla tam dereach, maser bitel shuman dagan. This is what it said also in our Mishnah. It also appears in this Braita that the lack of keeping the laws of impurity canceled out tam dereach. People no longer smelled or tasted fruits. Maser, the fact that they didn't take the tithes, got rid of the shuman of the dagan, the fatty dagan, the better wheat. Rav Huna, so now we get a story, very interesting story. Rav Huna eshkach tumakta dechinunita. He found this beautiful date that was very full and it smelled beautiful, fragrant. Shakla karcha besudare. Okay, he took it and he put it aside, kind of protecting it. Amarle benit ataru abba bere. His son. Now I want you to remember these people because they're going to come up later in the Gemara as well. Rav Huna and his son Rabba. So Rabba comes up. Amarle murchina recha dechinunita. He says, "Wow, I smell that beautiful smell of this great fragrant date." Amarle benit tara yesh b'cha. He said, "Wow, you must be really a special person. You must be very strict about impurity because look, you can smell things that other people can't smell." Yeah, I didn't think about this till right now, but in my house, there's some people who smell better than other people. You know, they have a very much keener sense of smell. Wonder if that's connected here. So he says, okay, you can smell this. Yahavaniale. You can appreciate this, so I'm going to give this to you. And we don't exactly know why he gave it to him, to keep, to protect, to have, to take back. We're not really sure. But what happens in this story? Adahachi, in the meanwhile, Ata Abba Bere. Abba, the son of Rabba, shows up on the scene, Shakle Yaveniale, and he gives it to his son. So the grandson of Rav Huna, okay, Abba, he shows up, and Rabba, the son, gives this date to his son. So Amarle Beni Simaktet Libi. So comes Rav Huna, the elder, and he says, you know, I'm very happy. You made my heart feel good because I can see you have this trait of tahara, but hiketat shinai, but you blunted my teeth because you gave away this date to your son. did you not appreciate the greatness of it? Right. So the immediate thing that came to my head when I saw this story was, you get some Godiva chocolate and you put it away and you save it, and then your daughter comes along and you want to share it with her, but then she just either wolfs it down or gives it to somebody else without appreciating it at all. And you say, what? Did you not understand how great that was? What do you mean you just gave it to your son and done with it? No appreciation whatsoever. So then the story goes on. The father has a lot of rachamim for his son. He loves his son very much, and that's why he gave this date to his son, because he loved him. But the son looks toward his son, right? I was thinking of the song, The Cat's in the Cradle, right? It's all that. And then the kid goes off and he's got his own kids to deal with and no time for the father anymore. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Yitapel be Rav Yaakov bar Barte. Another story of grandfather. An interesting thing that we're ending this Masechet talking about grandfathers and grandchildren. So he took care of his grandson, Rav Yaakov bar Barte, the son of his daughter. Gadol, when he got older, Amarle Eshkia Maya, he said, "Can you give me some water?" The grandfather said to the grandson, Amarle Lo Berichana, I'm not your son. I don't have to do anything for you. And this is what people say, Rabbe bar Bartanach. You can raise them all you want, but in the end, it's your grandchild, and your grandchild will, they don't really care that much about you. Which is a very sad reality when you think about, I'm not yet at that stage, but I have a lot of friends at that stage of grandparent, and they always talk about it's the most amazing thing. And this is a little bit raising some of the complications of it, opposed to the good that people always talk about grandchildren. Starting with the new Mishnah now. Last Mishnah of our chapter. There's actually something interesting here, which I don't have a lot of time to go into, but there's a bit of a debate about when this Mishnah ends and where the Gemara starts. You can see, if you have a regular Gemara in mind, about 4 lines from the bottom, my Gemara has brackets around the words Gemara Tanu Rabbanan. So there's a version that says the Gemara starts there and it's no longer the Mishnah. There's a version that this is actually the Mishnah. And if you look, my Gemara, it comes at the very end of the Masechet. There's a little line at the bottom that says there's even some texts that have more than what appears in our Mishnah. But our daf is long enough, so we're actually not going to read that section. But if you want to, you can read that extra section as well. Maybe it would have helped us. It would have made it move on to the next page, and then we would have had a really short daf for tonight. We're now going to have a list of things that happened when the following, right, when certain historical things happen. These are all related to the destruction, or perhaps some of them after the destruction. In the Pulmus of Aspasianus, okay, Pulmus, this whole question, even what Pulmus means, whether it's when he was ruling, whether it's when there was fighting with Aspasianus, he was Vespasian, okay, he was the father of Titus, who ends up bringing the destruction. Both of them were involved in the destruction. Seems that maybe we're not really talking about 2 different time periods, although again, there's a whole debate about this, but I'm not going to get into all that right now. In the time of Aspasianus, though, when the destruction was about to come, could be he put the siege on the city, and that was why they said no more atarot chatanim, no more crowns of the grooms, and the irus, which was a type of musical instrument, a type of drum. So the next stage, when Titus came, so they said no more of the crowns of the brides. And a person shouldn't teach his son Greek. We're going to have a whole story about that. We'll wait to see. The Pulmus HaAcharon, which most people think is the Bar Kokhba revolt, which happened after the destruction, with these big chairs or beds that they would carry the bride on. Right, you see in like ancient Rome, that was a big thing they used to do. We'll get to the Gemara and we'll see why the rabbi said this was okay. We're now going to have a slew of statements. When this person died, we no longer had, this is a way of idealizing the way things were. At some point, we had these great, amazing scholars, and we no longer have that anymore. Each one had something unique about them, but since then, we've never had anyone so great in that way. He knew how to bring parables in an excellent way, and we have nobody who could do that anymore. Those who were very diligent. The famous drasha of Ben Zoma of Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, right? I'm almost 70, we say at the Seder. And I didn't understand why we do Yitzias Mitzrayim B'Leilot until the drasha of Ben Zoma. Maybe that's why he was famous for his drashot. Rabbi Akiva batel kvod Torah. Remember Rabbi Akiva? We had this recently even. He was doresh every little quotes on the Torah. Mishamei, right? Every letter, everything. Mishamei Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa Bataluan Shema Aseh. That brings us back to Ta'anit. He was the miracle man. Mishamei Rabbi Yossi Katanta Paskua Chasidim. There were no longer Chasidim anymore. Why was he called Lamani Koshma Katanta, the small? Shehu Katanta Shel Chasidim. He was the smallest of the Chasidim, meaning he was at the end of the period where there were almost no longer any Chasidim, and he was the last of them. Mishamei Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai Batel Ziva Chochma, the glory, the splendor of Chochma, in wisdom. Mishamei Rabban Gamliel Zaken Batel Kvod Torah. This is similar to Rabbi Akiva, so there must be a bit of a difference in the Kvod Torah of Rabban Gamliel and the Kvod Torah of Rabbi Akiva. Umeta Tahara uPrishut. Okay, purity and Prishut, asceticism. Mishamei Rabbi Ishmael ben Pavi Batel Ziv HaKehuna. Okay, the glory of the splendor of the Kahuna. Mishamei Rebbe Batla Anavav Yirat. When Rebbe died, remember this because we're going to get back to this at the very, very end, there was no longer humility and fear of sin. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair Omer, Mishacharav Beit HaMikdash Boshu Chaverim Ubnei Chorim B'Chafu Rosham. Once the Beit HaMikdash destroyed people, all the Chaverim, the people who were keeping the laws, they became humiliated. They became at the bottom. Chafu Rosham, they put their heads down. Nidaldalu an Shema Aseh. There were no longer a lot of people who were doing good deeds. V'gavru ba'alei zro ba'alei lashon. The ones, the bullies, they're the ones who took over. Ve'ein doresh, ve'ein mevakesh, ve'ein shoel. Nobody's looking for God anymore. Al mid anu lihisha'en. What do we have left to do? What can we do? On who can we rely? Only thing we have is Al Avinu Shebashamayim. This is going to be a mantra that we're going to hear throughout. Rabbi Lezer Agadol Omer, Miyom shacharav Beit HaMikdash, shru chakimaya lemehavi kisifaya. Everybody went down a level. The very wise people became elementary school teachers or something like that. Okay, they became lower down on the scale. The sifraya, not to say anything bad about elementary school teachers, super important job. This sifraya kechazanaya, they became the chazanim, the one who were teaching the children. They dropped down a level to be the chazanim. Chazanaya ka'amada'ara. The chazanim became amei haaretz, right? Which we know already. Those are people that are not perceived as very fondly, if not perceived very fondly by the rabbis. But amada'ara azla vidaldala. What happened to all the amei haaretz? Where do you have left to go from there? They kind of disappeared entirely. Ve'en shoel ve'en mevakesh. Same thing we saw before. Nobody's looking for God. Nobody's looking to learn. What do we have left to do? All we have to do is search, right? Look toward God. Now they start describing a future time that's going to happen. And this is something that comes from here and some other places that describe what's going to happen. We're now at the top of Amud. Before the Mashiach is going to come, things are going to be really bad. So we're already describing how bad things are before the destruction. Now we're describing how bad things are going to be. Chutz b'yaskeh v'yoker ya'amil. It's going to be a lot of audacity of people, and the prices are going to go up. Ha'gefen titain priya v'yayim b'yokel. Like there's going to be a lot of fruits and that, but it's all going to be very expensive. Okay, so even though there's going to be a lot of grapes, the prices are going to go up. Umachut te'afech leminut. It's all going to become heresy. Ve'ein tochachat. No one's going to be reprimanding anybody. Beit Vad Yeliznut, the place where we used to gather, is going to be a house of prostitution. Hagalil Yecharev, the whole Galil is going to be destroyed. Hagavlan Yishom, could be, there's different explanations of Gavlan. We'll just stick with, it's an area. The area called Gavlan is going to be Shmama, wiped out. The people on the borders are going to wander from place to place, and they're not going to find any place to settle. The chokhmat sofrim tischach, and the wisdom of the sofrim is going to have a stench to it. In other words, what happens when someone has a stench? People stay far away from them. Same thing. Anyone who's fearing of sin is going to be hated, despised by the people. And there will be no truth, right? This is very, very depressing. If it wasn't bad enough, and this connects a little bit with what we talked about the grandchildren, the young people are going to humiliate the elders. Instead of getting up, right, in respect for elders, the elders are going to get up in respect for the young people. Ben menavel av, the son is going to despise his father or act in an inappropriate way. Bat kama bima, a daughter will stand up to her mother. This does happen in our day. Kala v'chamota, a daughter-in-law to her mother-in-law. That happens even more often. Oivei ish anshe beito. This is a very interesting line and relevant to our Masechet. that the people's biggest enemies are going to be the people in his house. Okay, right, that's where all the problems start here in the house with the sotah. Pnei hador kipnei kelev, the face of the generation is like the face of a dog. A dog, even though we view dogs as loyal, in the Gemara, they actually didn't view them as loyal at all. And that's what we mean. Haben eino mitbayesh me'aviv, he won't be embarrassed from his father. Amat yesh lanu lihishaen al avinu shebashamayim. Again, what do we have? The only thing we have is to rely on God. Now we start with our Gemara. Amarav. Let's go back. Where did we start in the Mishnah? We got lost with all these terrible things that are going to happen. Well, we started with no more of the crowns, the crowns that the chatanim, the grooms, would wear. So Amarav lo shanu ela shamelach b'gaflit. We're now going to have a whole debate about what material of crown is a problem and which are allowed, are any allowed at all. So the first opinion is only salt and sulfur is a problem. For some reason, that was viewed as something very nice. Those were the best of them. Some people actually think it's gold and silver covered with salt and sulfur. Unclear exactly. But if you use myrtle and flowers, then it's permitted, and roses. Shmuel says, no, that's also forbidden. You use reeds and simple things, right? Like you think about when you're on a tiyul and you make, one time we were on a trip with our shul and someone taught us how to make crowns from, just taking some of the twigs, that kind of thing you can use, but nothing more fancy than that. This is all, again, zecher l'churban. This is a way of remembering what we're missing out on. The Levi Amal, Afshal Kaniv Shal Chelatasur. Levi says, even those little dinky ones, even that's a problem. The Chen Tana Levi B'Matnita, Afshal Kaniv Shal Chelat Asur. Hey, Levi said in the Braita, also, he brought a Braita that said, even Kanim and Chelat is Asur. Vala Irus. So now we want to know, what is this Irus? Okay, it was a type of drum. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Tavla Dechab Puma. Even this, there's a debate about what it means, either a clapper with one bell, or perhaps some sort of a drum. Rabba bar Rav Huna, remember Rabba, the son of Rav Huna? He comes in this story again with his father. He made his son a tambura, which perhaps is a tambourine. It even sounds like tambourine. Ata avua tavre. His father came, Rav Huna, and he broke it. And he said, theoretically, you're allowed to use that, but people are going to confuse it and think that this is like the one that's forbidden, and they'll use that, and you can't use this either. Go take some sort of pot or something, cover it, and make a drum out of it, like an ad hoc kind of drum in your house. That's the only thing you can really use. What are these crowns of the kalot? You might remember that from Masechet Shabbat. It was this very fancy crown type of thing that the women had with this gold depiction of Jerusalem. Tanya Namihachi Ezu Atarot Kalot, a Braita to support this Irshal Sahav. Avaloseota Kipashal Milat. You can use this fine wool and make some sort of a crown out of that. Tana Apa Pat Chatanim Gasu, this Braita that said also they wouldn't allow the chupot of the Chatanim. There was also some nice thing they used. What is it? My chupat Chatanim Zehori Tamus Hevet. It was made of gold. It was red and it was made of gold. Okay, it had gold kind of intertwined into the red. A little bit strange to think of red at a wedding, but that's what they used. Tanya Namihachi, a Braita to support exactly this understanding. You can make something out of papyrus, and then you can hang gold on that, but not this red thing with the gold inside. You can't teach your son Greek. What's the story here? Well, there were two brothers from the Cheshmonai kingdom. Hyrcanus was outside, besieging the city, and Aristobulus was on the inside. It's a different version where it's flipped. So while they were besieging the city, the people inside Jerusalem wanted to bring sacrifices. So they would put money outside, they would give them an animal, and they would keep doing their sacrifices. Inside the city, there was an elder who understood Greek. And he told the people on the other side, no one could understand what he was saying. But on the other side, on the outside, they understood him. Amar lahem, he said to them, listen, here's the secret. You've been besieging the city, but you're not getting anywhere. You want to get somewhere? As long as they keep doing the worship, the korbanot, the sacrifices, nothing's going to happen. So tomorrow, when they give you money, give them a pig. And then they won't be able to sacrifice it. As the pig was going up to the half point of the wall, he puts his nails into the wall. The whole huge earthquake happens. The first thing they said was, cursed is the person who raises pigs, because of the story. So now the Gemara says, and on that year they said, we're about to have the Shavuot, where they used to bring the Shtei HaLechem, and the Korban Omer, which was what they brought the day after Pesach. They always used to bring it from right outside Jerusalem, but that year, because of the war, they destroyed all the fields, and they couldn't get it. They had to go find it from somewhere else. To which the Gemara asks, wait a minute, you really can't teach your kid Chochma Yavanit? Rebbe says, why are they speaking Sursi in Israel? They should either speak Lashon HaKodesh or they should speak Greek, which seems to be Greek as an option. Amar Rav Yosef, and on a different note, this isn't relevant, but it goes with the first statement, Bavel Lashon Arami Lama. Remember, we learned Aramite was a bad language. That's why, if people didn't like Aramite, and that's why the angels don't know Aramaic. So why are they speaking Aramaic? Ela o Lashon HaKodesh o Lashon Parsi. They should either speak Parsi or they should speak Hebrew. So the answer the Gemara gives is Lashon Yavanit L'chud, Chochma Yavanit L'chud. There's the language of Greek, and then there's the wisdom of the Greeks, which we kind of think of often about the wisdom of the Greeks as Greek philosophy. The problem is, if you say it's Greek philosophy, it doesn't really fit with the story that he told them in Greek philosophy about the pig. It doesn't fit exactly. Anyway, the Gemara says, so it's a bit of a question what Chochma Yavanit exactly is. Chochma Yavanit miyasira, but wait, even Chochma Yavanit doesn't seem to be problematic. Ha'amar Rav Yehuda Marshmo, Mishum Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, my dichtiv einai olala l'nafshi michol benot iri. How do we understand this pasuk? Elef yeladim ayu bebeit Abba. Okay, this is a pasuk describing again the destruction in Eicha, destruction of the temple. There were elef yeladim in my father's house. This is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. So he's talking about in Rabban Gamliel's house. 500 lamdu Torah, ו500 lamdu Chochma Yavanit. 500 learn Torah, 500 learn Greek wisdom. V'lo nisher mehen ela ani kan uben achi Abba ba'asya. And there's only me and my cousin left, and that's it. But what do you see from the story? 500 people in Rabban Gamliel's house learn Chochma Yavanit. It must be okay. To which they answer, very interesting answer, Shani Beit Shal Beit Rabban Gamliel dekrovim l'malchut havu. They were close to the kingdom. Because they were close to the king, they had relations with the king, they needed it. Ditanya misaper komi harezeh midarchei amori. Just like it says in another place, that having a Roman haircut is a bad thing. It's like being like the Gentiles. But Avtulus ben Reuven, he was allowed to do it because he was close to the Romans, and he actually works in Megillah. He appears with a bit of a different name, bit of a flip of the name here, but he ends up being this spy for the Jews. In fact, in that story, he actually isn't looked upon very fondly in the fact that he did this. In our story, it seems like it was okay that he did it. And Shabbat Rabban Gamliel, so we learned there's a time and a place for everything, right? Sometimes it's allowed if there's certain advantage to doing. My time, because of tzniut, it's better if she's in the apirion, you don't see the bride and everybody's looking at her. That's why the rabbi said it was okay, even though the other opinion said it wasn't okay, because the other opinion said because of Zechel Churban, we want to remember the destruction, we shouldn't go out in fancy things. The other one said, well, there's tzniut on the other hand. Now we're going to see a whole list. Very, very similar to the Mishnah. We're going to go through this quickly, and then we'll get to the hopeful point at the end of our Masechet that you've been waiting for. Hanu Rabbanan. Mishamet Rabbi Eliezer nignaz Sefer Torah. Okay, so when Rabbi Eliezer died, there were no longer the Sefer Torah. What Sefer Torah this was a good question, but the Sefer Torah was hidden. Mishamet Rabbi Yoshua batla etzal machshava. He was a person who gave a lot of advice. Some people think also advice with other nations. Mishamet Rabbi Akiva batlu zuho'ei Torah v'nistatmu ma'yanot hachokma. So the arms of the Torah and the streams to get to the Torah were closed up. Mishamei Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah batlu atrot chochma, the crowns of wisdom. Sha'aterech chochmim oshram, the crowns of wisdom is wealth. And remember, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azar was wealthy. But when he died, there was no more of this. Mishamei Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa batlu anshe ma'aseh. These are the miracles. Mishamei Rabbi Yossi ben Katnuta batlu chasidim. This we saw already. No more pious people. V'lam nekashmo Rabbi Yossi ben Katnuta. Why was he called this? She'aya shumi katnei chasidim. We're just reading a Braita that's very parallel to the Mishnah with minor differences. Mishamei ben Azai batlu ashaktanim, the diligent ones. Mishamei ben Zoma batlu darshanim. Mishamei Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel ala govai. The locust came up and ate all the crops. And there were big problems. And then the problems just got worse and worse in the time of Rebbe. In the Mishnah, it said, Rebbe batla anava v'yirat chet. Amarle Rav Yosef latana. Rav Yosef says to the Tana, Lo titne anava. You ready for this one? Get rid of anava in the Mishnah. It's not true that Mishamei Rebbe, there's no more anava anymore, humility. Because there's me and I'm humble, which obviously, right, I see some laughs there. What do you mean you're humble? You're bragging about being humble. That's a little bit strange. Amarle Rav Nachman Latana. Rav Nachman said to the person teaching the Mishnah, Lo tine yirat chet, don't say yirat chet because there's me and I am God-fearing. What is happening at the end of this Masechet and how does this connect with what we've been learning? So I want to just very briefly, because it was a very long daf, and I want to get to the rest of our program, but I want to talk for 2 minutes about an idea here, just to leave you with some idea. One thing that I've mentioned in class that I was developing was this mibachutz umibifnim, and I think there's a lot there also, where it came up with Aristobulus also today with the bachutz ubifnim, came up in a few places. It's also a theme to think about the bachutz, the inside of the house and the outside, but that I'm going to leave aside for right now. But I want to end with this idea of the end of the Masechet, and why is it so depressing and all these terrible things? And what does it have to do with where we started with Sotah and we ended with Egla Rufa? Something that's similar about Sotah and Egla Rufa is that both of them are an attempt to try to figure out a situation of doubt. We have a woman, we don't know what she did, what she didn't do. We have a dead body and we don't know who killed. And it's hard for people to live in doubt. And what we have is we have a ceremony to allow us to proceed with this doubtful situation. In one place, we actually resolve it by either she's guilty or she's not. The other case, we at least say we're absolved of sin, right? We can move on. We can put this aside. It's not our responsibility and we can move on. And we all know that we've been in situations where we're in doubt about something, and it's a very hard situation to be in. And the Torah set up these situations, these ceremonies where we could move on beyond the doubt. And then we get to, at the end of the Masechet, once we have all these adulterers, there's no more. Sotah waters don't do what they're supposed to do. And once we have all these murderers, we no longer have the Egla Rufa ceremony. And the people are at a loss because they now can't fulfill this ideal of trying to get beyond our situation of doubt. So what happens? And then we were also discussing this whole thing is happening also around the time of the destruction. And the time of the destruction was incredibly unsettling for everybody in that time. So what they're dealing with is the difficulty, and that's what we've been talking about the last few dapim, about the struggles of how we deal with post-destruction society, how we deal particularly with Egla Rufa and Sotah, where we're left with these terrible doubts and we don't know what to do. And I think that where we have the answers is at the end of the Mishnah, assuming that this is actually the Mishnah and not, right, like I said, there was a bit of a debate whether this is the Mishnah, but the Mishnah ends with that line that keeps going over and over, which is, Al milan r'hishaen al avinu shebashamayim. Now, we have to go trust in God. And it goes back to what we saw before about the katnei emunah, the people who didn't believe that tomorrow, right, worried about their parnasa for tomorrow, and the kids who also thought, oh, Alicia fixed the problem, now we don't have any jobs, and they didn't rely on God. And when you're in a doubtful situation, the first thing you do is realize that there's God and there's something to rely on. The second thing is how the Gemara ends, which is how do they get up and they say, oh, I'm humble, right? It seems like such an arrogant statement, but I don't think it was arrogant at all. And I think what he was trying to say is, don't think the way these dapim were telling us how desperate the situation is. But no, there's hope. There's leaders. And there are leaders. Don't think those leaders were the best leaders and we have nobody else, right? We always complain, oh, where are all the leaders that were 50 years ago? And our leadership is terrible and corrupt and like all the things that we've been discussing those last few days. And he comes up and he says, I'm a leader. And so does Rav Nachman. And they say, we can move on. We have broad shoulders. There's leaders that you can rely on. And I think what it's trying to say is that there's two things. It's number one, having faith in God. And number two, having good leaders who are strong enough to kind of push the people ahead and for the people to recognize who are the good leaders in society and who should they be following. So I think that's the message that our Masechet ends off with, kind of as a way of us, when we're in a situation of doubt, having those guidelines as to how we can move forward. And with that, Hadran Egla Rufa, Uslik Ala Masechet Sotah. And we're now going to say the Hadrans together. And Judy's going to come next to me. And every time we say Masechet Sotah, we're going to let Judi, we're going to pause for a second. And Judy's going to add also Talmud Bavli, because Judy's finishing Shas, 7.5 years of learning. For those who are new to the game, this is a huge inspiration. Okay, so here it goes. We're going to get started. Hadran alach Masechet Sotah.
Talmud Bavli.
V'hadrach alan. Da'atan alach Masechet Sotah.
Talmud Bavli.
V'da'atach alan. Lo nitneshe minach Masechet Sotah.
Talmud Bavli.
V'lo titneshe minan. Lo ba'alma haden. Lo ba'alma da'ate. Hadran alach Masechet Sotah.
Talmud Bavli.
V'hadrach alan. Da'atan alach Masechet Sotah.
Talmud Bavli.
V'da'atach alan. Lo nitneshe minach Masechet Sotah.
Talmud Bavli.
V'lo titneshe minan. Lo ba'alma haden. V'lo ba'alma da'ate. Hadran alach Masechet Sotah.
Talmud Bavli.
V'hadrach alan. Da'atan alach Masechet Sotah.
Talmud Bavli.
V'da'atach alan. Lo nitneshe minach Masechet Sotah.
Talmud Bavli.
V'lo titneshe minan. Lo ba'alma haden. V'lo ba'alma da'ate. Yehi ratzon mafanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu shetehe toratcha umanutenu ba'olam hazeh v'tehe imanu la'olam haba. Hanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba bar Papa, Rafman bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Tzorcha bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. הערב נא אדוני אלוהינו את דברי תורתך בפינו ובפי פיות עמך בית ישראל, ונהיה אנחנו כולנו צאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה. מאוהבי תחכמני מצוותיך, כי לעולם היא לי. יהי ליבי תמים בחוקיך, למען לא אבוש, לעולם לא אשכח פיקודיך כי בם חייתני. ברוך אתה אדוני למדני חוקיך, אמן, 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 סלע ועד. יהי רצון מפניך, אדוני אלוהי, כשם שעזרתני לסיים מסכת סוטה,
בתלמוד בבלי,
כן תעזרני להתחיל מסכתות בספרים אחרים, לסיימם, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות, ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה. וזכות כל התנאים והאמוראים ותלמידי חכמים, יעמוד לנו ולזרענו שלא תמוש התורה מפינו ופי זרענו עד עולם. יתקיים בנו ואת הלכך תנחה אותך, שוכבך תשמור עליך, הקיצותה היא תשיחך. היבי ירבו ימיך ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים, אורך ימים וימינה, שמאלה עושר וכבוד, אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך לעמו בשלום. אשר כוחך. Okay, מאוד מרגש. כולם, everyone's invited to come to my house when they finish Shas. Okay, we're going to quickly learn the very beginning of the really the very beginning of Masechet Gitin. Mazal tov to everybody finishing. Great accomplishment, Masechet Sotah. And we're going to read the very first line of Gitin. Hamevi get mimidinat hayam. Everyone's invited to class tomorrow to hear the rest of it, but Hamevi get mimidinat hayam. The beginning of the Masechet starts out not with laws of divorce exactly, but if you're bringing a get from somewhere far away, a husband sends a messenger to deliver the get. The messenger has to say, if he comes from far, it was written by me and in front of me, and it was signed in front of me. Why this is, we're going to have a big debate, Rava and Rabba, which is going to be very confusing because their names both sound the same. But they're going to have a big debate, which we're going to discuss for the next few dapim. But the main thing here that's really interesting to point out, and I just want to end with this idea, is that what are we concerned with? We want to make sure that the get can always be proven that the woman's divorced, because we don't want the husband to come later. It's a way of protecting the woman. The husband doesn't come later and say, oh, it was an invalid get. So the fact that this witness brings it and says, the messenger who brings it says, it was written in front of me, it was signed in front of me, that makes the get valid, and nobody can come later and start to make problems. Okay, we'll have all sorts of questions, why one witness, etc. But anyway, that's for tomorrow's class. Very exciting to now move on to the next part of our program. We have Dr. Tammy Jacobowitz, who I know from many years ago. We were at Lindenbaum crossed paths at the same, we were both there at the same time. She works now at SAR High School as a chair of the Tanakh department and in charge of Makom B'Siach, which is an immersive adult education program for parents. She's taught and teaches in places including the Wexner Heritage Program, Yeshiva Chovevei Torah, and she's working on a Parsha book, stay tuned, geared toward parents reading to young children. So we're going to now hear from Tammy.
Thank you so much, Rabbanit Michelle. What a thrill to be here. I know you skipped that paragraph of Chalkeinu B'Yoshvei Batei Midrashot, but I really feel is a osher. I feel so lucky to be welcomed into this community of people who are learning together. I must just offer my disclaimer that I've not done the daf of Sotah, so I'm not coming to teach you anything about the Gemara that you've learned. I hope you'll be generous with me, but I'm really so grateful to be in this beautiful group. Okay, today I want to state my thesis, and then I will show you where I think we can find it in the Makorot. I will not put the sources up for the first few minutes, and then I will share my screen when I get to the proving part. We tend to think about Sotah as a ritual that pertains to women, a difficult ordeal, embarrassing, violent, perhaps, definitely challenging. Or we think of it as an intramarital event, a way to temper a husband's jealousy. In other words, a ritual that pertains exclusively to the relationship between a husband and a wife. I, for one, have had a good deal of difficulty thinking about the spectacle aspect of this event, the public nature of it, the gazing. Today, I would like to reframe Sotah and offer an alternative lens that emerges from looking at Sotah in its biblical context in Bamidbar and paying attention to its neighbors to help us think about the ritual in a different way. By neighbors, I mean the first two sections in Parakeh of Naso, V'yishalchu min ha'machaneh kol tzarua v'chol zav v'chol tamei lenefesh, as well as Zelat Hager, and Nazir, which shows up after Sotah in Parak Vav. If we look at Sotah in its context, and again, I will show you the psukim shortly on the screen, we can think about it as a mechanism by which the Torah communicates to us a primary idea about the ideal community, the way this community ought to function, the ways we can help each other, and the values that living within such a community can uphold. By this I mean, the communal structure that these psukim teach is a structure in which the community members are responsible for, expected to, and capable of helping to safeguard the integrity, the Kedusha, of the wider community or machaneh. This means that community members are given the means, the mechanism, and the opportunity to act out, reinforce, and thereby deepen the fundamental principles of the community. The Sotah ritual is a very public ritual. In the public square, the Beit HaMikdash, in front of and with the help of the Kohen, a couple that has either experienced an affair or has suffered from the suspicion of an affair must go through the ordeal that allows the entire community to heal from this experience. Both an affair as well as the suspicion of an affair do not just affect the short and long-term happiness of a couple, but it impacts on the entire community. The integrity and sanctity of a marriage between two people relies on the shared sanctity of each couple within the community. It is a social contract that plays out throughout the community. If one couple breaks that bond and contract, and nothing in public is done to address it, reject it, question it, if it is allowed to remain in semi-private, the toleration of that infringement threatens the very sacred structure of the marriage contract, and a ripple effect is felt and perceived throughout the machaneh. Through the Sotah ritual in the public arena, that infringement is met head-on, and the community thereby brings the private into the public and says quite loudly, this cannot be tolerated. We cannot allow this to infiltrate into our machaneh and become normative, unnoticed, unseen, and as such integrated into the fabric of who we are and how we operate on the social Kedusha plane. As Rabbanit Michelle said, the Gemara discusses the end of the Sotah ritual when it was abandoned and became defunct. What was the cause? The volume of cases was too big to handle? No, adultery had become too rampant. And so the ritual would no longer work, meaning the community had already forfeited or lost the ability to do this kind of healing work. The Kedusha at the bedrock of the institution of marriage had already been eroded. And so the community could no longer manage the infringements properly. It wouldn't be honest to do so. The values in the community were no longer there. This kind of situation, ironically, is just what Sotah is trying to prevent, a situation where the community has grown tolerant of the erosion of values and can no longer address it. So in a sense, what I'm arguing is that Sotah is empowering for the community. You mentioned the connection to it's a different sort of opportunity for the community not to look at gaze or, God forbid, bring shame to the suspected woman and man in the case, but it is a healing. It's a way that the community communicates that they have the responsibility and the opportunity to safeguard the boundaries of the machane and to ensure the sacred nature of the camp. That's my thesis. And now I want to show you where this comes from. Okay, so if we look at the psukim in context, what you see right here on this first page are the psukim from Bamidbar Hey. And you see on the top from verses 1 through 4 is the first section, which we'll come to in a minute. And there's the second section from 5 through 10. And on the bottom begins the psukim of Sotah. One of the things that the yellow highlights comes to help us notice is that the word ma'al shows up in the second one and in the third one. The idea of ma'al, which normally shows up in the context of the mikdash, a way of breaching that which is sacred, this shows up in the discussion of Sotah. And so first of all, just as a kind of bedrock piece of evidence, when there is, again, an affair or a suspicion of an affair, it is not just between the couple. This is an event that affects also the sacred, the mikdash, the nature of the community. Number 2, as you know so well, and as I mentioned already, the ritual shows up, is performed in the public arena. And my son, who was doing the daf, alerted me to the Mishnah that talks about V'chol harotze lirot v'lirot, v'chol hanashim mutarot lirota. Right, that everybody was, encouraged, allowed to come and see. This was not something that was just about the couple and the Kohen. This was an opportunity, again, for the Kahal to come together and to mutually witness and therefore begin the process of healing for the entire community. And just as an aside, I was thinking as Rabbanit Michelle was speaking, that there is something very beautiful, if you think about it, the doubt that defines the scenario. At the end of the ritual, everybody goes home, and whatever rumors might have been milling about the community are put to rest. There is no more doubt, there is no more uncertainty, there is nothing else to talk about. It is no longer in the hands of people to think about. It is time for the community now to move forward in the process of reinscribing Kedusha into the machane. But now let's talk about the wider context. And I want to spend most of the time in the first section, the curious psukim, which are at the very start of Bamidbar, I would say quite serendipitously. We're moving up to this parasha this week, beginning of Bamidbar, and so coming up next. And the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar is a time where everything is being put into order. The chaos, which is later in the Sefer, is nowhere to be seen. This is a time where everybody is getting their mission and their place and the flags, and we're ready to move forward. And before there's any movement, we have our psukim at the top of Parakeh. Tzav et b'nei Yisrael v'yishalchu min hamachaneh kol tzarua v'chol zav v'chol tamei lanefesh. So Bnei Israel are given a directive that they have to actually physically remove from their camp 3 groups of individuals, each of which, as we know, have slightly different statuses when it comes to tum'ah, but somebody who has tzarat, somebody who has a discharge, and somebody who has spent time with a dying person. Each of those individuals need to be removed. And the pasuk continues, why do you need to do this? V'lo yitamu et machanehem asher ani shochein betocham. If those people are not removed, the existence of those people inside the machaneh without responding ritually in the way that the Torah has prescribed, that threatens the sanctity of the machaneh. And it goes right to the heart, asher ani shochein betocham. Now, there's something at first glance, and of course, the next pasuk, they do it. There's something sort of violent and not PC about this, right? Take these people out and everybody has to do this. Everybody has to work together and bring these people out of the machaneh. Question number 1, why is it the community's responsibility? And question number 2, why do they need to do it right now? Presumably there have been people in these different statuses for quite some time. Why does this show up right here, right now? So for that, I want to, how do I get to the next page? Okay, I want to take us to Rashi. Rashi, first of all, as always, asks, what is this doing next to that? In a Rashi that I didn't include here, Rashi talks about the many connections between the different scenarios in the first 3, and we know also from the Gemara the connection between Sotah and Nazir. But here Rashi says, Tzavet B'nei Israel, this is Rashi Bamidbar Hey, Parasha zu ne'amra b'yom shehukam hamishkan. This moment of V'yishalchu min hamachaneh, the right now, in my question, the right now is the very day that the Mishkan was put together, the time when the machaneh, as it were, was actually going to be moving forward. This is the national symbolic moment enacting the empowering truth that we are all responsible for maintaining the machaneh. So right now is the time to look around, to notice who's in your midst, and to do what be done to keep the machaneh running properly. The Midrash, if you look on the bottom there, the Midrash makes an even stronger statement about this day, connecting the Yom Shehukam HaMishkan directly back to the day of Matan Torah. We have 2 Midrashim to look at. One is here from Vayikra Rabbah, and the Midrash says as follows: Tani Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, B'sha'a she'amdu Yisrael al Har Sinai v'amru, Kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh v'nishma, be'ota sha'a lo haya behen zav u'metzora, v'lo chigrin, v'lo sumin, v'lo ilmim, v'lo chirshin, v'lo shotin. Says Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, and the day when the Jews stood at Har Sinai and they said, we will do and we will listen, at that moment, there was not among Am Yisrael, not anybody who was a Zav, who was a Mitzorah, and nobody who had any kind of physical disability. And on that moment, the Midrash quotes the pasuk from Shir HaShirim, in God's eyes, Kulach yafa ra'ayati umum ein bach. Perhaps they did physically have these disabilities, but in God's eyes, everybody was perfect. At that moment, at Matan Torah, the entirety of the people looked to God fully whole. V'kevan shechat'u lo avru yamim kalim ad shenimtzahu behen zavim u'mitzoraim alota sha'hu omer v'yishalchu min ha'machaneh kol tzarua b'chol zav. So this Midrash says that at the moment of connection, the first real marriage, right, between God and the Jewish people, the Matan Torah, there was this status where everybody was b'li mum, b'li tzarat, b'li zav, but that didn't last long. And by the time we come to our moment of the Yom Shehukam HaMishkan, there were people in this status. And now this is when the Jewish people are told, okay, time to take them out in a certain way, time to restore Am Yisrael to the status that they had at Matan Torah. If we look at the next midrash to build on this idea, looks funny on mine. Michelle, does it look normal for you? Okay, there, Bamidbar Rabbah. Bamidbar Rabbah says it a little bit differently. And we're looking right at the highlight. Ketzad, b'sha'a sheyatzu Yisrael miMitzrayim, hayu kol ruban ba'alei mumim. When they left Mitzrayim, they were all ba'alei mumim. Why? Mipnei shahayu yegeim batit u'balevenim ve'olim l'rosh habinyan. The mumin, as it were part of their normal work of slavery. This was the mark of their experience. And when they came to Matan Torah, Kevan sheba'u lemidbar Sinai, Amar ha'elokim, kahu kvodah shel Torah, she'eten ota l'dor ba'alei mumin. Would this be the kavod of the Torah, to give the Torah to the group of people that are like this? Rather, ma'asai Elokim, Amar lamalachim sheyirdu etzel Yisrael, ve'yir pa'u otan. So he gave them the opportunity, right? The malachim came down and he healed them. That's at Matan Torah. But when we're now in the time of B'yom She'ukam HaMishkan, it's not God anymore who is offering the refuah. Now it is in the hands of Moshe telling the Jewish people, V'yishalchu min ha'machaneh. It is your responsibility. I am ready. Lahashrot shchina beinechem. I am ready to fully inhabit in your machaneh in a more mature way, perhaps, than we were at Matan Torah. And now it is your responsibility to take matters into your own hands, to notice who is in your midst, not, God forbid, to evict, not for the purpose of saying you don't belong here, but the way that Tum'ah works, and we learn this in Vayikra, it's a rotating structure. People come into these statuses all the time. It's like how I feel on Friday night when people who have just gotten up from Shiva come in to the shul. So each of us will be in that place at some point, and we look at each other, we notice each other, we welcome people back in after they've been out. This is community taking care of each other. This is agency. This is no longer in the hands of God. This is what the Torah is teaching us. The community has the responsibility when it comes to Tumah, and the community has the responsibility, as we said, when it comes to Sotah. The idea of Korban Chatat, which again is so important when we're talking about issues of Tumah, Korban Chatat teaches us, we know from, let's say, postpartum, a woman after she gives birth gives a Korban Chatat, and the famous question, how could that be? Did she do any kind of sin? It's the opposite of a sin. Why is she giving a Korban Chatat? Because she has gone through this experience that removes her from everybody else. It's one of those, thank God, normal things that happens. She needs to respond ritually by recognizing that failure to respond, for her, no big deal. But this is a communal event. This has an effect on everybody else. The laws of Tumah disabuse us of the narrative that we tell ourselves sometimes, that my life is my life, your life is your life, I'll do me, you do you. The Torah says that's not the ideal of a Jewish life. The ideal of a Jewish life is a communal existence, and maybe this sounds like a fantasy vision, but the fantasy vision is that we see each other, we notice each other, our moral failings are a piece that we accept. And if you think about Tzarat in particular, the way that Chazal teach us, if Tzarat is a function of Lashon Hara, imagine living in a community where the amount of Lashon Hara was so small that it would show up on somebody who everybody would say, oh, okay, this happened, we can help you. We'll get the Kohen, we're going to respond, you'll leave, you'll come back. That is a fantasy vision of, number one, a moral level of the Jewish people, but also a fantasy vision where we help each other, we see each other, we take care of each other, and we help to uphold a very high moral standard.
Thank you very much. That was really excellent ideas. A great way to end the Masechet with a whole different perspective on this, on the Sotah situation. Thank you, Dr. Tammy Jacobowitz. Great having you with us. We're going to end our evening with a very special presentation by Judi, who's going to share with us her thoughts on ending 7.5 years of learning. I still remember the day that Judi came to my house 7.5 years ago to begin learning. And it's really an amazing path that she's taken. And I thought of two things in our daf today, which kind of made me think of Judi. So we started our daf with talking about the importance of really limsor et atzmech l'limod Torah, to really, do it mitoch hatchak, not always so simple. And Judi, as you'll hear, those who don't know her, has gone through some quite complicated things over the past number of years. And despite that, or maybe through that, managed to still make time on a daily basis to learn the daf. And it's a true inspiration. And the other thing that I think about when I think about Judi is that pasuk about boker miyitain erev and erev miyitain boker, in the simple reading of that pasuk. I think Judi really epitomizes the having true optimism, always looking at the next day and what will be and what the next stage is going to be. And I think it's a lesson that we can all really learn from him. So we're now going to hear from Judi.
Thank you, Michelle. There are 525,600 minutes in 1 year, but how do you measure a year? To quote the song Seasons of Love from the musical Rent, in daylights and sunsets, in midnights and cups of coffee, in inches and miles and laughter and strife. In the Gemara, the sages measure time in a variety of ways. For example, in Masechet Brachot, they measure through eating habits. Rabbi Chanina says that the time for the recitation of the evening Shema begins when the poor person enters to eat his bread with salt. In Masechet Nedarim, they measure time through speech. How much time is required to say a short phrase, the time necessary for a student to say to his rabbi or to her Rabbanit, "Peace be upon you, my teacher." For the past 7.5 years, 2,711 days to be exact, I've measured my life through learning the daf. I've learned almost every day for the past 7.5 years, in truths to be learned, in goodness and care, in friendship. During all this time, the daf and the people who learn with me have been my rock, my support, and my inspiration. My reason for starting to learn the daf are not so inspirational, but rather pragmatic. I had just lost my job and I needed something to get me out the door each day. I saw an announcement that Rabbanit Michelle's Daf Yomi group was going to be starting Masechet Sotah at her house, so I joined. After a short time, I was hooked. A bit later, I found the perfect job, which I still love, and which gives me the flexibility to continue learning the daf every day. In these 7+ years, my life has included the marriage of a daughter, my eldest son's university graduation, the death of both of my parents, the birth of a grandson, a terror attack that critically injured my younger son, lots of hospitals, lots of rehab, lots of love, and lots of friendship from my daf buddies and more. Basically a roller coaster. My only other time learning Gemara was many years ago when I was first married. I learned on Shabbat afternoons with a group of men from my community. We spent years learning a few pages of Masechet Sanhedrin. When Sanhedrin came around in the Daf Yomi cycle, I was very excited. However, in the middle of learning Sanhedrin, my father became very ill, and I had to go to Florida. He passed away the day before Hurricane Irma hit South Florida. During the week between his passing and the funeral, Rabbanit Michelle and my other daf buddies were in constant telephone and email contact with me. I felt the love and caring of the community, and I saw how Daf Yomi really had become part of my life in laughter and strife. That year, I chose to attend the 7 a.m. minyan to say Kaddish for my father so that I could make the daf at 8:15 at Rabbanit Michelle's dining room table. Ruth, unfortunately, joined after a few months. Another year rolled around, and we got to Masechet Chulin. We hadn't gotten much into it when my son Netanel was gravely injured in a terror attack while on guard duty as a soldier in the IDF. I remember that the soldiers knocked on our door on December 13th, 2018, and said, "Your son has been critically injured. Hurry up, pack a bag and come to the hospital in Jerusalem." Again, my daf support group kicked in. My daf friends Naomi and Sherry called me from my house asking what they should pack for me and bring to the hospital. Ani drove me home and back again to the hospital a few days later. So many others were there for me. Thank you, really, from the bottom of my heart. We celebrate good times together as well. On January 2020, we sat together at the Siyum HaShas, and many more friends started learning Daf Yomi. Women asked how I could make such a commitment. I told them, take it one day at a time. Daf learning grows on a person after a while. Then Corona hit. We could no longer learn at Rabbanit Michelle's dining room table. Nope, Zoom. Instead of our small, intimate group, we became an international group of friends from Australia, Europe, Israel, and North America. Lots of writing in the chat box during class and via WhatsApp after class. It's been especially fun to meet people in person when the chances come. Almost a year after Zoom started, my mom was diagnosed with lung cancer, so I went to visit her. During my time in America, I got to meet Joanna in person in Washington, D.C. My mom passed away during Masechet Beitzah. I couldn't go to the 7 a.m. minyan to say Kaddish because it would be too late for the 7:15 daf. I followed Emma's lead and went to the 6:10 minyan instead. Elisa, unfortunately, joined our group a bit later. We supported each other during some of the difficult pages of Masechet Yevamot. As a community, we recently came together in mourning the loss of one of our daf friends, Carol. Even though we've never met her in person, we all felt her loss and were there to provide support for her husband, Art. During my Daf Yomi journey, I have not only met living friends, but I've gotten to know so many of the rabbis. Some may ask nudnicky questions, others are quite harsh. Others are very compassionate and caring. I would have liked to meet more of their daughters, wives, sisters, and mothers. My first grandson was born during Masechet Ketubot. He's growing up during a time when women learning and teaching Gemara is normal and natural. Thank you, Rabbanit Michelle. You have created an amazing community. Thank you to my family and friends around the world for your encouragement and support. Thank you, daf friends near and far, for being here for me in good times and bad. I'm unable to mention everyone by name. Just know that you're all in my heart. You've improved and enhanced my life in ways I can't begin to describe. Thank you for joining me on this Daf Yomi adventure. To finish with the Seasons of Love and Rent theme, it's time now to sing out, though the story never ends. Let's celebrate, remember a year, or a cycle in Daf, in the life of friends. So, will I continue? Daf is a way of life for me now. I can't imagine starting my day without learning the Daf.
Oh, amazing. Wow, very, very inspirational. I hope that you all like Judy's. You could see how life goes through the daf, and you remember things that happened through what you were learning at the time. And it's really an amazing experience learning with you for 7.5 years. Looking forward to continuing the experience and look forward to being there with all of you as you finish Shas. And thank you, Maggie, for all your help. Thank you to Ziv, who's now been helping. Maggie Bezrat Hashem is going to be giving birth soon. So no WhatsApps to Maggie while she's on maternity leave. So you can email us instead and somebody will get back to you. Ziv will be taking over a lot of Maggie's responsibilities. And there's Ziv. And thank you to Mimi for all the work you do. And thank you to all, each and every one of you for being part of this wonderful, wonderful learning experience together. It's great being on this journey with all of you. Mazal tov to everybody. And see you tomorrow at Kitin.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and good night. Mazal tov, Yishar koach, everyone. Sorry, the microphones are open now. I think we both allowed them to be open and then one of us canceled it. So, good night, everybody. Mazal tov. You can now say something short before we close.
Mazal tov. It was wonderful.
Mazal tov, and thank you. Excellent as always.
Fantastic.
Judi, that was amazing.
Yes.
You are such an inspiration.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on my DAF journey.
Thank you.
Long and winding road, huh?
Yeah.
It's inspiring.
Different song.
And you can start it all over again.
Yeah.
In how many hours?
Time you read some commentators.
All right, everybody.
That's real inspiration.
Thank you, Judy.
It was great.
It was terrific. Just terrific. Thank you. All my heart.
Beautiful as always.
Thank
Michelle,
you.
it's going to be
Thank you,
very
thank you.
crowded in your room in 3 minutes.
You look like sisters. I know you're
They
sisters of the
do.
heart. Yes.
Well, we're all related at some level.
Yes. Oh,
Judy, I remember when you started. I remember sitting around the table. It's really, I'm just so proud of you, Michelle, also for what you built. It's just, it's incredible. Kol hakavod.
And not
here,
just
Sherry.
not just the learners, but the community. I mean, it's a real community.
I'm always
Yeah,
amazed that
it's a
what we're
family.
able to build around the table, we're also able to build through Zoom and through the Siyums and getting together. And
And
it's
WhatsApp.
really amazing.
Don't forget WhatsApp. It's crucial.
Yes.
Yes, we need more WhatsApp groups.
Hi, Georgia and Art.
Okay, everybody. Ziva's going to close the meeting now. Mazal tov, and see you all tomorrow morning. Or
Mazal tov.
depending where you are.
Mazal tov.
Good luck, Maggie.
Yes.
Thank you.